Hello. So, you might have heard of this little show called The Rings of Power, which is on Amazon Prime. And it has been quite controversial because lots of people hate its guts, and many people hate it and they haven't even watched it. So, I thought I should do a bit more of a balanced review because I think some of the hate is now just trendy and it's almost like it's fun to hate the show, so let's just bash it because, whatever, you get nothing better to do with your time. But I actually really enjoyed the show. And as when all is said and done, I am placing Rings of Power as number two in the Lord of the Rings pantheon, in between the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies. It is absolutely much better than the Hobbit. I'm sorry to say. I know maybe you don't want to hear that, but let me tell you why. So, nothing can really compare with the Lord of the Rings movies. I don't think they'll ever be able to do another version that will be as good as them. And it was lightning in a bottle. And congrats to Peter Jackson for doing such a awesome, fabulous job. And I don't ever want to see another version. I mean, I guess I would if one came out. But to me, those people who did those parts, it's like, that's Frodo, that's Gandalf, those are, it's done. The Hobbit was a huge disappointment. And I remember seeing it in the theaters and just like so, in some ways, mortified at some spots because it was childish. And granted, The Hobbit was a children's book. I read it as a child. So there's no shame in The Hobbit being for children, but the implementation of the Hobbit movies was just so inferior to the Lord of the Rings in every way. And the people who are complaining right now about the Rings of Power forget how disappointed we were by the Hobbit. It didn't look as good. It didn't look realistic. It basically looked like a video game. It still looks like a video game. It's a fun video game if you just lower your expectations, which is what I do. I rewatch The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, kind of cycle through them. Usually around New Year's, I will watch one of the series, the extended version. So every other year, I might watch The Hobbit. And I enjoy it very, very much. But now my expectations are lowered so I don't get upset about it like I did when I first saw it. And I think the same thing applies to the Rings of Power. People have hugely high expectations, but in retrospect, if you revisit it, it's really not as bad as you think that it is. And The Hobbit had some many good things, many good things. Martin Freeman as Bilbo was amazing. He was great in that role. And the dwarfs were great. And of course, there's Gandalf, and we all love Gandalf. So I actually liked Toriel and her romance with, I think it was Killy, the dwarf. That was added in because the Hobbit books were all men and they needed to have a female. So they created an elf called Toriel. I loved her. I thought she was awesome. And I thought that the romance was actually quite interesting. I know a lot of other people hated it and they grumbled about it. So it's like, this isn't the first time that Lord of the Rings went quote unquote woke because they needed a female. The thing that I thought was really bad about the Hobbits, beside the horrible goblins, the stupid Goblin King, the Goblin King song, the whole scene where they're in the Goblin Cavern and it looks like, very cheesy, kind of Indiana Jones Temple of Doom level of cheesy, really unrealistic action. That was the worst. Some of the worst part was the whole Lake Town stuff with Stephen Fry. I like Stephen Fry, but I didn't like his character in that. And that, what was his name? Alfred, the monobrow dude. Oh, he was awful. Why did they create that character? He was just like really annoying. And so we have a lot of things to complain about in The Hobbit. And I think apples to apples, Rings of Power just like blows The Hobbit out of the water. The only thing that Rings of Power doesn't have, which would maybe have made it a bit more interesting and engaging to start with, would have just to follow The Hobbit from the beginning. And I think that was the biggest mistake that they made with the Rings of Power, is that they started off with Galadriel and they don't make her into a likable character. So if you don't like the main character that they have, it makes it hard for you to want to continue. And they waited a while before introducing our main Hobbit, which is Nori. Now, when the new Hobbit, or the old Hobbits as they were, the Harfoots, first came on scene and they pop out of the foliage with the nuts and berries in their hair and a twig sticking everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cheesy. This is like worse. They remind me of the kids in the what's it, the Lost Tribe in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I wonder if they have their own weird language and they're going to tell little stories, about Walker, Walker. Yeah, I mean that's what it reminded me of. It was just like I did not like the aesthetic at first, and so I was really afraid that I would hate the Hobbits. And it turned out that I really enjoyed them, and Nori has grown on me. I think she does a good job. Poppy is a little annoying, but Poppy sings amazingly. So kudos to Poppy's voice. And I like Sadok, the elder, who is the Black Hobbit. A lot of people get upset because they're Black Hobbits and Black Elves. It's a fantasy world, people. Well, Tolkien didn't mean that. Tolkien lived in white England at the time, and he was writing for his audience in England. And I'm fairly certain that if Tolkien were alive today, he wouldn't have a problem with it. And you're saying that you're certain that he would have a problem with it, and you're basically saying that he'd be kind of racist. And he was explicitly against the Nazis, and he actually wrote a letter to the Nazis, basically giving them the literary middle finger because they were inquiring as to whether he was Jewish. Go look it up. There is no way that Tolkien would be upset by having a Black elf in 2022. I'm sorry. So that to me is not enough reason to throw the show away or to think that it's overly woke. There's plenty of shows that are far more like that have been bastardized to push certain political agendas or to change significantly, like Wheel of Time. I watched Wheel of Time before I read the books, and I enjoyed Wheel of Time, but I could tell that stuff had been changed and it was kind of annoying. Like they created all these sexual relationships that weren't in the book. So the problem with the Wheel of Time is that they made significant changes to the plot to encompass adding sex to the show. And it wasn't just gay sex, it was straight sex, it was polygamous sex. Now, because of the show's rating, they didn't explicitly show the sex, but the fact that they're even making people in the series sexual with one another when they weren't in the first book of the series is an example of going a bit too far with the license, as it were. So they have the main character, Rand, who they also try to downplay. It's very clear that Rand is the focus of the books. I mean, yes, there's other characters that are important, but they try to make the Wheel of Time television show not so much about Rand, even though everything centers around Rand. And the funny thing is that when I first watched Wheel of Time, the first shot, I think one of the first shots, they show Rand with his father, I think. And I'm like, oh, that's what this show's about. It's about him. And then all of a sudden they bring all these other people in and try to confuse it and make you think that like everybody's equal to him, including the women in the village. And I'm like, no. I'm really guessing that the original books was about this guy Rand. And of course, I was right about that. So they changed that. They made it so that even though in the books there's a clear sex difference, I mean, sex versus gender, like biological sex difference between how the magic works. Men can do one side of the magic, the women can do the other. So if there's going to be a dragon reborn, which is the whole thing about the first book, it can only be a man. And yet in the TV series, they make it so that two women might also be the dragon reborn, which breaks the whole magic of the book. So they broke the magic, they downplayed the main character, and then they had him having sex with Egwene, where in the book, they're both young and innocent, and they haven't even kissed. They just moon over each other. So why have them having sex? Now, there's no explicit sex in the show, but it takes time, and it's just not, it's not even realistic. When I saw them in bed together in the show, I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. They're supposed to be innocent village kids. Why are they sleeping together? This is supposed to be kind of medieval times. Like, I just don't buy it. So it's not believable. And then they have the Moiraine. She's the Aes Sedai sorceress or witch or whatever you want to, magician, whatever you want to call her. So she now has this goopy romantic relationship with the female head of the Aes Sedai, and it's this big secret thing that they're hiding from everybody. And as I'm watching the show, having not read the books yet, I'm like, oh my gosh, they totally added this because they wanted to be, inclusive and whatnot, which, there's the idea of being inclusive is not inherently evil or wrong. It's just when you're trying to shoehorn it into everything and kind of push it in everybody's face, that's where a lot of people kind of pull back and go, whoa, like it's kind of like being a Jesus freak and constantly going on about like if you don't accept Jesus, you're going to hell. It's almost too evangelistic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, this totally wasn't in the book either, I'm sure. And there's this huge controversy about it. And then they changed the plot dramatically to censor around this drama that they have created in the show around this secretive lesbian relationship. So then I go and I read the book, and the first book, there is absolutely no lesbian relationship. Now, some claim that it's hinted throughout the series. Well, there's 20 books in the series. I haven't read all 20 books. Apparently, the head witch and Moraine were pillow friends when they were novices, so maybe they messed around a little bit, but it was never explicit in the book. And in the reading that I did of the first book, they were just really good friends. And there was no goopy, overly melodramatic romance in between them. And what's wrong with being good friends? And let's just say they were good friends and they messed around when they were novices because there weren't any boys around. Is that the same thing as like having like this overly dramatic, I'm going to love you until the end of time relationship, which is just kind of sappy? If I want to watch that sort of thing, I'll watch that old movie with Christopher Reeve and was it Jane Seymour, like Somewhere in Time. I'm not looking for that in a fantasy movie. I wouldn't care if it was, straight or gay. It's like, let's get back to the action. So they changed the plot dramatically. And in reading that first book, everything that Amazon changed, they made it worse. They could have made the book, if they just followed the first book, the book is really amazing. And it's just very like constant action. You just want to keep turning the pages. But in the Wheel of Time series, because they wanted to add all these, goopy sexual things going on, it just drags the plot down. And so I think it was like the second to the last episode where Nynaeve, who's got the hots for Lan, I don't remember how you pronounce his name. Anyway, she's got the hots for him. And he's in the books, he's kind of like, no, this isn't going to happen. And at least in the first book, they didn't hook up at all. Here they are like rolling around in bed. And I'm like, why aren't we wasting time on this in the show? Excuse me. They're rolling around in bed in the television show. And I'm like, why are we wasting time on this? We've got to stop Satan. Like, we got to go and get the Dark One. Like, I don't care. And that episode was just the worst in the series because it's like, and Nynaeve is really unlikable. She's unlikable in the television show. She's also unlikable in the books too. So you can't completely blame Amazon for that. So this is, with the Wheel of Time, they really went off the rails. And I think they did a terrible job adapting the first book. And it's considering it's a television series, why not just do the books? Like you don't have to try to merge all of the books together. So they did a terrible job with their adaptation. And clearly they were doing it because they wanted to add certain things for certain diversity points. And that includes, and they also had like a polygamous relationship that they threw in there and made it explicitly sexual with their sexy talk. Whereas in the books, it's like, it's not really that explicit, and nor does it need to be. Like, can we just kind of use our imagination sometimes? And can people just be friends? I mean, that's the other thing. Like, why does everything have to be sexual now? I'm not just talking about like gay versus straight. I'm talking about like with straight people too. Like, why do we have to have like so much sex and everything? When Mulder and Scully were on the X-Files initially, Chris Carter, he was like, I don't want them to get romantically involved. It's great that they're friends. In fact, I wish they had stayed friends. In one of the movies, they finally end up together. And it's like, and that movie was like really terrible. That I think was the second movie. It was awful. I don't need to see them in bed. It was really great that they were good friends. And so we've lost this value of just people being good friends without it constantly being like this, well, we got to hook everybody up. Like in in the internet world, it's called shipping. We got to ship these people together. Like, do we really need to do that with everybody? I think it in some weird ways, it means like if we are good friends with somebody, are we thinking to ourselves, like, maybe I should marry this person? Like, we can have good friends that we really love dearly that we don't want to sleep with, and that's a good thing. So anyway, that's a little side rant. Now, the Rings of Power do have some little relationship stuff going on, like with Bronwyn and Arondir, but it's very chaste and it's very lightly done. If the people who did Wheel of Time had gotten their hands on Rings of Power, they would have already had Galadriel and Halbrand romping around in the hay and having sweaty sex, and there just being a lot more explicit stuff going on with them. And it's a good thing that those people were not doing the Rings of Power. I've seen comments where folks were saying, oh no, please don't have Galadriel and Sauron get together in that way. And who knows, maybe they will in the next season. But at least in the first season of the Rings of Power, the most sexy stuff we have in there is a kiss between Bronwyn and Arondir the elf, and the camera pulls way back so that you just see it in the distance. And when I saw that scene, I was like, oh, they're totally making sure that this television series is palatable to all of those countries abroad that don't want to have all of the, the overly sexual stuff that Americans tend to be into. So you won't, at least in season 1, have the plot get overly sidetracked with gratuitous sexual romps and overt excessive relationship drama, which is where the Wheel of Time went wrong. So anyway, I think the concerns over the woke stuff are a little overblown, but a lot of it's driven by Galadriel being kind of like an unlikable snooty bitch in the beginning of the show. Now, I am going to share some spoilers, but I will say spoiler, 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 and then you can turn off the video, but I won't do any spoilers until then. So yeah, they could have done a better job with maybe starting off with the Hobbit perspective, because that's kind of what we're used to, and that kind of humanize, even though hobbits aren't human, but you know what I'm saying, it humanizes it, and hobbits are cute and everybody likes hobbits, and Galadriel is not so, I mean, she's pretty, but she's not cute, and we don't all like her. So they did kind of make a mistake in how they framed the story from the beginning. The first 2 episodes are the most ponderous and slow, and a lot of people turned it off after episode 2, which is a shame, because it gets a lot better, I think. And once you get to know the characters, there's a lot of good stuff later on. But it is a bit of a mixed bag, and at the same time, that also, it's what makes it interesting. You never know when you turn on an episode who's going to be featured. There was an entire episode where Elrond wasn't in it at all, and neither were the hobbits. They were focusing on the Southlanders, and they were battling the orcs. And that was one of the best episodes. Just a lot of action. I was just like kind of edging my seat, what's going to happen? And it was great. There was some stuff that was a little cheesy. They have this kind of cliche thing that happened in it, but other than that, it was pretty good. The visuals of this show are stunning. People put a lot of work into this. I know people are saying, well, for $1 billion, I expected a lot more. Come on, people. First of all, we have inflation. Secondly, we have 8 episodes that are practically movie length. So divide $1 billion by 8, and you get about the budget of the average first run movie these days. It really wasn't a lot of money when you look at it that way. So I think that that's a little bit overblown too. The overall story is kind of a little jumbled at first, but then it starts to come together. And as the pieces start to fall into place, and the urgency of the situation increases, you get more and more engrossed with what's going to happen. And ultimately, we know what's going to happen in the long run because we've already seen Lord of the Rings. But it's really fascinating watching how they put this together. Yes, it's true, they don't follow Tolkien's exact blueprint for how the rings were made, but I kind of look at that as this is kind of like a history. And often when people write histories down, they don't quite get all the details right because, we're still arguing today as to whether Jesus was actually a real person or not. It's 2,000 years later. Do we know exactly what happened back then? We don't. So I think it's okay to kind of loosely Amazon shouldn't go completely out to lunch, but to loosely massage, I think I'm okay with. And it's a show, or I'll just say in my mind, I'm watching a parallel universe version, or I'm watching the Mandela effect version, and I just let it go. And I don't let it myself get so wrought up about it that I can't enjoy something. I mean, the world's like depressing enough that I don't need to get myself all worked up because the television show isn't exactly following what the Silmarillion said. so that's my perspective on that. The relationship, I think, the relationship between Elrond and Durin is amazing. I think I mentioned that. And the Hobbit plotline gets better and better. And there's just a lot of really interesting things. So now I'm going to get into the spoilers because I can't speak to some of the complaints without getting into the spoilers. So spoiler. If you don't want to hear the spoilers, just turn this off. So they kind of created this additional plot line that wasn't in the Tolkien lore, from what I understand, where the Mithril, this is the special ore that the dwarves found, that the Mithril has a quality of spiritual light in it that is going to save the elves because their light is dimming or something. And so a lot of people were annoyed by this. But I actually found that this was an interesting plot line because it set up all of this tension between Elrond and his friend Durin, and Durin and his father. And it also explains some of what happened in terms of the mining craziness that led to the Balrog escaping. So I feel like the way that they kind of fit this in was fairly respectful of Tolkien. It's kind of like what they did with The Hobbit, where they put Tauriel in there to make sure that they still had a woman, but they didn't dramatically change the rest of the story. They just kind of, it's an addition. I'm personally okay with additions to stories, but I'm not so okay with subtractions. So to give an example, with the Wheel of Time, there is a major character, the Gleeman, who travels with the group for the whole first half of the book. He's a very important part of the story. And in the television show version, they just have him show up in one episode, almost like a cameo. And when I was watching it, and this was before I read the book, I was like, why is this Gleeman guy acting like he's known Rand and Matt for ages? And why did he just sacrifice himself to save them from the Fade who's following them? It didn't make sense to me. And then I read the book and I was like, oh my God, this guy was supposed to be with them from day one. Why did Amazon change that? That was stupid. It was pointless and stupid. And then even for someone who never read the book, it didn't make sense. So that is a subtraction from the story. That's taking somebody out that was integral to the story. They did that with some other people in that first book. So really they butchered Wheel of Time when they did that show. Just absolute butchered the book. So I understand why fans are upset with that. I don't even want to watch season 2 now because I'm busy watching reading the book, the second book. And I'm like, I don't want to watch the Amazon shows and then get annoyed because they went and added stuff that wasn't in the book just because they wanted to push a political thing and they subtracted stuff that they shouldn't have. That just went too far for me. So before you think that I'm just like overly forgiving, I'm not. I might finish all of the Wheel of Time books, and then after I've forgotten them for a while, maybe then I'll watch the Wheel of Time shows because I won't remember it so much, and I'll kind of be expecting that I'm going to put in my mind it's a parallel universe, Rand. It's not the same universe. It's the Mandela effect version. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought, but the short version is like, I thought that the Mithril thing was actually kind of interesting. So I didn't have a problem with that. I loved the whole thing with Halbrand and Galadriel. Because she's so annoying and haughty, we find out that it's because she's got a dark side. And I love to see her battling with her dark side. So the idea that I have for the next season, which I would love to see, is Dark Galadriel. That would really redeem the fact that she's so annoying in season 1, because we don't want to root for her. She's a bitch, let's face it. So if they made her evil, that would be more interesting. And yes, that's kind of separating her from the lore a bit. That's kind of putting her on a detour. But wouldn't it be more interesting? So at the end of Rings of Power, she and Halbrand have this conversation where he's basically trying to turn her over to the dark side, basically like Darth Vader did to Luke in Empire Strikes Back. And they do this through this kind of imaginary world in her mind. And then at the end, she's in the water drowning, just kind of like when he first rescued her. Elrond comes and finds her, and Halbrand is gone. So she goes to Celebrimbor and she goes, "Oh, Halbrand's gone. You're not going to find him." Doesn't tell anybody that he's Sauron. You think that would be like kind of the lead in. And then she says, "Why don't we create a third ring?" Well, we know where that third ring is going to go. It's going to go on her finger. So I'm thinking, and it surprises me that nobody has said this that I saw in any of the forums. I'm thinking that she's already gone over to the dark side, or she's been brainwashed and she doesn't realize it. She's covering for Sauron, and she's getting her own ring of power right now. So if they actually go through with that and make her Dark Galadriel, I actually will be cheering. I mean, like, yes, that would be great. So there's some interesting things that they've set up for season 2. And yeah, there's some things I wasn't that crazy about. Like I thought Isildur was very badly written and he was just kind of annoying and petulant. And I realize I don't know if he's a 20 something or acting like a teenager. I don't know what age he's supposed to be. So he was just like, yeah, where I'm supposed to buy him as like the king who, fought off Sauron. I'm not buying that, but maybe he's going to mature as the series goes on. The stranger, I always thought he was Gandalf right away. He had the thing with the little moths and butterflies, and that was totally a Gandalf thing. So even though they did like a bait and switch at the end and they kind of made it out like maybe he really was Sauron after all. And for a second, I was like, oh, maybe he really is. Gee, maybe it was like a red herring about that other stuff and that this guy's actually Sauron. And then as that went on, I was like, no, 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 no. No, they have to be mistaken. And so I was really excited to see that they were mistaken. And when he used his staff with the light coming out and fought them off, the bad, whoever they were, and then he goes, "I'm good." I was so excited. I was like, yes. When literally my chair, I'm like, yes. Yeah, it's cheesy. But you know what? This is a fantasy show that should hopefully be for the whole family. Kids should be able to enjoy this, at least older kids. You don't want little kids who are scared, that the orcs are going to be too scary for them. But for like an older kid, 10 years old, this would be awesome. And I think a lot of the naysayers are forgetting what it's like to be a little kid. And they're forgetting that this is something that little kids should be able to enjoy, or even just big kids. And so I don't know. I just wanted to put out a more balanced review because to me, we've got enough things to complain about in the world that are far more important to complain about, like internet censorship and all that sort of thing, that we should, maybe put if we're going to use our energies to fight something, maybe fight something that's really worth fighting instead of fighting a fantasy television show. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. And I'm sure eventually there's going to be more Tolkien movies and television shows because it's Tolkien. I'm going to predict that 20 years from now, just like, how I feel about The Hobbit, or a lot of people feel about The Hobbit, that we're gonna look back on the Rings of Power and we're gonna say, you know what, that was actually pretty good. It was flawed, but it could have been a lot worse, and I really enjoy it. I am personally going to be putting Rings of Power on my regular rotation of Middle Earth movies and shows that I watch, usually around Christmas time, as like my little binge watching gift to myself. And so I'm very, very happy that they made it. Do I wish that some of it could have been better? Sure, there's certain places they could have improved. Having what's her face, Bronwyn save Arondir at the last minute when the orc was spewing black goo in his face was just silly and it was cliche. Yeah, there's some bad stuff in there. Yes, having a big volcano blow up and people not getting fried to a crisp or having at least ash clog up in their lungs, that was just a little unrealistic. Okay, whatever. They could have improved on some things, but overall, I thought it was actually, I give it like a B plus, A minus. and I'm definitely going to watch it again, and I'm very much looking forward to season 2. And I'm actually hoping maybe in season 2 they'll also turn Arondir into an orc, because he had all that black goo in his face, he got infected or something. That would be kind of an interesting, although I love him as an elf, but I would really want them to do more with his character. I feel like they just didn't use him enough. I wanted more Arondir, and they kind of just gave him tasks to do, and I feel like they need to use him better. But other than that, very, very good. And hopefully it'll be even better next time, now that they've kind of learned what maybe isn't so well received and what people want. So, all right, I hope this was at least fun to listen to, even if you disagree. Thank you. And I don't know how they say bye-bye in Middle Earth, like bye-bye, merry meet, see you later. May the one protect you as you walk along your path into the forward misty mountains, etc., etc. Thank you. Bye-bye.